They say the greatest mystery doesn't lie in the stars, nor in the depths of the sea, nor even in the secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. The greatest mystery lies within us. What are we really? Beyond the name we carry, beyond the body we inhabit, beyond the thoughts that cross our minds like fleeting birds. Who is the one who observes, who feels, who dreams? From the moment humans first looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond, we also began to ask what lay within. That question has echoed through cultures, religions, philosophies, and sciences. It has sparked wars, inspired minds, nourished souls, and yet, it has also left many in the despair of not knowing. The curious thing is that we all think we know who we are. We answer quickly when someone asks our name, our profession, our opinions. But if we pause, if we close our eyes and dare to ask from deep within, "Who am I?" then silence arises. A silence so dense, it seems to speak on its own. The mystery of being isn't solved with simple answers. A title isn't enough. A personal story or a future plan won't do. The mystery of being demands depth, courage, and something even harder, letting go of all the masks we wear. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when you fall silent? Who are you when there's no camera, no mirror, no expectations? Many have tried to answer that question with grand words: soul, essence, spirit, consciousness, energy. But every definition is just a reflection, a shadow projected on the cave wall of our perception. Being cannot be trapped in words. It is sensed. It is brushed against in silence. It reveals itself in fleeting moments of total presence. In those rare, eternal seconds when everything makes sense, even if you can't explain why. In those instants where there is no judgment, no past, no future. Only you and something far greater than you. But that moment doesn't last. It vanishes like smoke between your fingers. And then we return to the questions, the thoughts, the fears. We return to the character. Because we all play a role in this play called life. From childhood, we're taught how to behave, what to feel, what we should become. We're told what's right, what's wrong, what's expected of us. And little by little, we build an identity like someone constructing a house with borrowed bricks. But somewhere in the soul, the true voice never stops whispering. A voice that doesn't shout, that doesn't demand, just whispers. And that whisper tells us that we are more. That there is a mystery waiting for us, inside. Some seek it through meditation, others through art, others through science or religion. But the real journey is not outward, it's inward. And that journey begins with one decision. Stop pretending that you already know who you are. Because only when you let go of certainty can you begin to see. Imagine for a moment that you had no name. That you woke up one day with no memory, no documents, no personal story. You look in the mirror, but you don't recognize your face. You don't remember where you came from or where you were going. There is only silence. Who would you be then? Would you be your body? Would you be a collection of sensations? Or would you simply be the awareness that observes, that feels, that exists? In that state, far from all the labels that define you, you might discover something essential. That being doesn't need justifications. It doesn't need titles, achievements, or external validation. Being simply is. And that changes everything. Because we live in a world that teaches us to become someone. To stand out, to build a reputation, to accumulate experiences that give us a sense of identity. But no one teaches us to simply be. To be present. To inhabit silence. To feel life without needing to possess or explain it. In the race to become something, we forget what we already are. We become characters trapped in a script we didn't even write. And the saddest part is that we defend that character fiercely. We get offended when someone questions it, we suffer when someone doesn't validate it, and we live in fear of losing it. But what if that character was just a temporary construction? What if beneath all of that, there was something deeper, something more real? There are moments in life, often brought on by crisis, loss, or intense experiences, when the character breaks. We feel lost, empty, directionless. And though that feeling may seem terrifying, it's also a door. A door to being. When you no longer have anything to prove, when everything you thought you were falls apart, then the opportunity arises to discover what was always there, waiting. The core. The essence. That which does not change, even when everything around you does. Ancient sages spoke of this as awakening. Not a mystical or esoteric awakening, but something deeply human. The moment when you stop identifying with what you do, what you have, or what others think of you. The moment you finally recognize that the value of your existence is not conditional. And in that moment, a new way of living begins. A life that's lighter, more authentic, less controlled by fear and more guided by intuition, less enslaved by shoulds and more connected to being. But getting there isn't easy. We don't live in a culture that celebrates being. We live in a culture that celebrates doing, having, performing. From childhood, we're rewarded for obeying, for achieving, for fitting in. We're taught to compare, to compete, to please. And little by little, we lose connection with that part of us that simply observes, that does not judge, that does not need reasons to exist. That part is still there. It's always been there. But it's buried beneath layers and layers of conditioning, beliefs, inherited fears, and unhealed wounds. And that is the real mystery of being, that even though it's the deepest thing in us, it's also the most forgotten. How do we recover that connection? There's no single formula, no manual, but there are paths. Paths walked by thousands before us. Paths that aren't always lit with promises or certainty, but that lead to something real. Honest. Silence is one of those paths. Not the silence of not speaking, but inner silence. That space where we stop reacting automatically, where we observe what we feel, what we think, what we fear, without identifying with it. Nature is another path. When you walk alone through a forest, when you listen to the wind in the trees or the murmur of a stream, something inside you aligns. It reorders itself. It calms down, because nature doesn't try to be anything other than what it is. And in its presence, neither do you. Art is another path. Creating, writing, painting, dancing, not for recognition, but out of inner necessity. From the urge to express without filters, without goals, without fear. In those moments, being surfaces. It reveals itself. It remembers itself. And there is another path, pain. Though no one seeks it, pain has transformative power. When something breaks you, it also opens you. It leaves you exposed, vulnerable, but also receptive, more human, less controlling, more real. Pain can be a portal to being, if you dare not to run from it. But to walk any of these paths, one fundamental attitude is required: honesty. Honesty with yourself, with what you feel, with what you think, with what you fear. There is no deeper discovery than looking at yourself in the mirror without masks and daring to say, "This is me, and that's okay." Because only when we stop fighting what we are, can what we truly are begin to emerge. We are not broken. We never were. We are just asleep, distracted, caught in a constant noise that doesn't let us hear our inner voice. But that voice is still there. And every time we listen to it, even for an instant, something inside us remembers. It remembers that we didn't come here to be perfect. We came here to be whole. And that includes our light and our shadows, our virtues and our contradictions, our certainties and our doubts. Accepting that is an act of bravery, and also an act of love. Because the mystery of being is not solved through logic. It is not an equation to be solved. It is a process to be felt, inhabited, and only when we live it, with openness, with presence, with compassion, that mystery stops being a threat and becomes a gift. One of the most persistent illusions in human life is the belief that we already know ourselves, that our experiences, our thoughts, our emotions are enough to say, "This is who I am." But being, that deep, silent, eternal space within us, does not let itself be pinned down so easily. In fact, the more you believe you know who you are, the more trapped you are in an idea. And every idea is a boundary, a quiet cage made of words. Because being doesn't fit into a description. You are not your story. You are not what happened to you. You are not your failures, your accomplishments, or even your dreams. You are the one who has been there all along, while all of that was unfolding. You are the witness, the space, the stage upon which all those events, thoughts, and emotions appear and disappear. And that space cannot be harmed, corrupted, or defined. It can only be felt. But there is something within us that fears that space, that flees from silence, that constantly needs to fill the void with noise, activity, thoughts, distractions. That something is the ego, the character who thinks it's the star of the show. And while the ego isn't the enemy, it has a function and a purpose. It is a terrible guide when it comes to knowing the self. The ego seeks certainty. It wants control. It craves recognition. Being, on the other hand, wants only presence. To breathe, to be, to feel. The ego defines itself by comparison. I am more than, I am less than, I am different from. Being, however, recognizes that everything is connected, that there is no true separation between you and what surrounds you, that there is no inside or outside, above or below, good or bad in absolute terms. There is only experience, only awareness. And when you understand that, even for a second, the world changes. You stop fighting against life. You stop fighting against yourself. And for the first time, you feel peace. But that peace is not the passive kind of surrender. It's the active peace of someone who has stopped pretending. Someone who has let go of the burden of having to become something. Someone who simply allows themselves to be. That state of presence is more powerful than any belief. Because when you are truly present, you don't need answers. The question itself dissolves. Because you're no longer searching outside for what has always been inside. The problem is, we're not taught to be present. We are taught to chase, to achieve, to plan. From school to work, everything pulls us away from now. It projects us into the future or traps us in the past. But being only lives in the present. It cannot live anywhere else. The past no longer exists. The future hasn't arrived. This moment, right now, is the only real place. And being can only be found here. Look around you. Listen to the sounds. Feel your breath. Notice your body from within. Everything is happening now. There is no other time. And yet, how often are we truly here? Most of the time we're on autopilot, living like machines repeating the same patterns, routines, and thoughts. But we are not machines. We are not repetitions. We are living consciousness. Every second we choose to wake up, to pause and breathe, we are returning to ourselves. Remembering who we are. And that remembering isn't a logical conclusion. It's a direct experience. A knowing that transforms everything. Suddenly your worries shrink. Other people's opinions lose weight. Your goals stop being imposed expectations and become natural expressions of your soul. Because when you live from being, you no longer do things out of fear or a need for approval. You do them because they arise from within, because they make sense, because they resonate with who you are. That is true power. And the most beautiful part is that this power doesn't need to impose itself. It doesn't need to be shown off or measured. It is a silent power, unshakable. It's the power of someone who has made peace with themselves. But reaching that place requires something many are not willing to give up: the character, the image, the need to be someone special. And it's not easy, because we live in a world where everyone wants to be extraordinary, unique, admired. But being doesn't need admiration. It only needs recognition, not from others, from yourself. To recognize yourself, to see yourself without filters, without expectations, without fear, and to accept what you see, not because you're perfect, but because you are, because you're alive, because you exist. That act of acceptance may seem simple, but it's revolutionary. In a society that constantly tells us we are not enough, accepting ourselves deeply is a radical act. A silent revolution that transforms everything from the roots. Because when you accept yourself, you stop looking outside for what you already have inside. You stop demanding that the world confirm your value. You stop begging for love, for recognition, for validation. And in that moment, you become free. You become light, sincere, present, capable of loving without fear, of acting without guilt, of living without needing to justify every step. Being doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be lived. And the more you live it, the more you understand it. Not with your mind, but with your whole body, with your heart, with every cell. And that kind of understanding is unforgettable. There is a moment in every human life when everything suddenly stops. Sometimes it comes without warning. Sometimes it's pushed by a loss, a sudden change, or a crisis that shakes everything we believed was solid. And in that unexpected stillness, when the external world stops shouting, a narrow opening appears. A glimpse into the invisible. That moment might feel empty, useless, uncomfortable, because silence is uncomfortable. Doing nothing, not thinking, not projecting, leaves us face to face with something we've forgotten, the experience of simply existing. And what happens when you just exist? What happens is that the world keeps spinning, but you stop chasing it. Thoughts pass by like clouds, but you are no longer those clouds. You are the sky. And when you stop long enough, you begin to see. You see that most of your decisions were shaped by fear. Fear of not being enough, of not being liked, of losing something, of being left behind. You see that many of your relationships were rooted in need, in dependency, in the desire to fill an emptiness that only you can face. You even begin to see that your achievements, as noble or impressive as they were often a way of proving something, not to yourself, but to the world. And that realization hurts. It stings to realize that so much effort was born out of a sense of lack. But it also liberates. Because once you no longer need to prove anything, you begin to live from a different place. From truth. And truth is simple. So simple it can be frightening. Because we are used to making things complicated, adding layers, justifications, masks. But being is pure, honest. It needs no decoration, only presence. And that presence is so powerful, so transformative, that many people spend their entire lives avoiding it. They prefer the noise. They prefer the drama. They prefer distractions. Because facing oneself is the greatest challenge. Solitude doesn't scare us because of the absence of others. It scares us because of the presence of ourselves. And that's what we avoid. But those who dare to inhabit themselves, even for a moment, discover that the fear was only a shadow. That behind it lies peace. That beneath the noise, there is stillness. That under the confusion, there is clarity. And that clarity doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from stopping the fight. From accepting. Not in a defeated way, but in a sacred surrender. surrendering to the now, to the body, to the emotion, to what is. Because the more you fight what you feel, the more you strengthen it. The more you run from who you are, the further you drift from yourself. But when you stop and breathe and simply stay, something inside you begins to unfold. It's like a flower that's been closed for years suddenly feeling the light for the first time. And that light doesn't come from outside. It comes from you. It has always been within you. But you didn't see it because you were too busy pretending, chasing, hiding. Now, with nothing left to do but look inward, that light begins to shine. And with it comes a deep understanding that you don't need to be more, that you don't need to have more, that you don't need to change anything in order to be you. That doesn't mean you won't grow, that you won't evolve or improve. It means you won't do it out of lack, but out of fullness. There's a huge difference between doing something from emptiness and doing it from abundance. When you act from emptiness, everything is struggle, anxiety, fear of failure. When you act from abundance, everything is expression, freedom, flow. There's no heaviness, only ease. And that's what happens when you live from being. Everything becomes lighter, more natural, more real. Your relationships change. You no longer search for someone to complete you. You find someone to share yourself with. You no longer beg for love. You offer it because you feel it within. Your work changes. It's no longer just a means of income or recognition. It becomes a channel, a space where you can express, grow, and give. And if it's not that, you'll notice. You'll feel it. And that awareness will guide you toward new paths. Your relationship with time changes. You no longer live obsessed with the future or stuck in the past. You begin to enjoy the now, to live in it, to savor it, because you understand there is no other place where life truly happens. And your relationship with yourself also changes. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You stop comparing. You stop punishing yourself. You look at yourself with compassion, with tenderness, with respect, and that gaze transforms. Because the greatest act of love you can offer the world is to inhabit yourself honestly, with integrity, with presence. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot support others if you are falling apart. You cannot create beauty if you are at war with yourself. But when you find that peace within, everything changes. And you don't need to shout it. You don't need to convince anyone. Your very presence becomes a flame that warms those who come near. That's the paradox of being. The more you empty yourself of what you thought you were, the more you fill with what you truly are. And that emptiness is freedom. For centuries, the great sages of humanity have tried to point the way back to being. Some called it awakening, others enlightenment, nirvana, return to the source. But all of them, across time, cultures, and traditions, agreed on one essential idea. You don't have to go far to find yourself. You have to go deep. And that truly is what costs us the most. Not because it's complicated, but because it's terrifying. We are afraid of what we might find when we look inward. We're afraid of discovering we are not who we thought. That our certainty was built on fragile ground. That our security was made of smoke. We fear seeing our wounds, our contradictions, our unconfessed desires. But above all, we fear discovering that all of that is also us. That there is no ideal version of ourselves we're supposed to reach, only a more honest one we must embrace. And to embrace is a radical act. Acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to mediocrity. It means ending the war with reality. It means embracing your story with all its light and shadow, and saying, "This too is me." And from there, true transformation begins. Because you cannot change what you refuse to see. You can only transform what you're willing to face, without judgment. And that's what being invites us to do, to see, to look with clarity, To live with open eyes, an available heart, and a quiet mind. When you live from being, you don't need ornaments. Your presence is enough. Your authenticity speaks louder than any speech. You no longer need to convince, impress, or hide. You become a mirror for others. A mirror that doesn't judge, that doesn't demand, just reflects. And that way of existing in the world is deeply healing. Healing for you. Because you no longer live in constant tension. You're no longer watching yourself, trying to keep up appearances, afraid to fail. You just are. Healing for others. Because your presence gives them permission to relax too. To stop performing. To stop pretending. To show up as they are. And in that sincere encounter, something rare, precious, almost sacred occurs. Real connection. The kind of connection that doesn't rely on shared opinions or appearances or beliefs. The kind that transcends you and me. That reminds us that at the core, we are made of the same thing. That being is not only individual, it's collective. Because when you reach the center of yourself, you discover that that center is not only yours. It's shared. It's the same fire burning in all. And in that moment, separation dissolves. You no longer see the other as a stranger, as a competitor, as an obstacle. You see them as a mirror, as another expression of the same source. And from there, compassion flows effortlessly. Not a pitying compassion, but a vibrant, alive one. A deep understanding that we are all walking toward the same place, back to ourselves. Some walk asleep. Some walk in fear. Some walk in rage. But all of us, deep down, are longing to return home. And being this home, it's that inner space where everything fits. Where you don't need to prove anything. Where you can rest. It doesn't matter how far you've gone, how many masks you've worn, how many times you've gotten lost. You can always return. You are only ever one breath away. One pause away. One moment of silence away. Coming back to being is coming back to the essential. To what is simple. To what is real. To what doesn't need to be explained. And the more you return, the more natural it feels. The more obvious. The more inevitable. You don't become someone new. You become what you always were, but without layers. Laughter becomes freer. Tears become pure. Words become sharper. Relationships become deeper. You start saying no without guilt. You say yes with force. You walk away from what no longer resonates. You open up to what calls you from the unknown. Not because you have guarantees, but because you trust. You trust life. You trust yourself. You trust that invisible thread that pulls you from within. Because you felt it, and you can no longer ignore it. The mystery of being remains a mystery. You can't capture it, define it, or fully understand it. But you can live it, inhabit it, celebrate it. And that is enough. You don't need to be perfect. Just present. You don't need to have everything figured out. Just be available. You don't need a plan for everything. Just walk with honesty. And in that walk, slowly fear fades. Judgment dissolves. Comparison disappears. And in its place, trust grows. Presence deepens. Love expands. A love that doesn't need explanation. That doesn't negotiate. That doesn't depend on conditions. A love that simply is, like you. Because that love doesn't come from the outside. It's born from being. And the more you dwell in it, the more you see it in others. In the earth. In the sky. In the face of a stranger. In the silence of an ordinary morning. And then, not with your mind, but with your whole being, you are not alone. You never were. You never will be. Because the being that lives in you is the same that lives in all. Only the disguise changes. The story, the form, but the essence is one. You are life watching life. You are awareness witnessing itself. You are the mystery being. And that, simply that, changes everything. Welcome home. One of the greatest paradoxes on the path to being is this. The closer you come to your truth, the less you feel the need to define it. Before, you wanted answers for everything. Who am I? What is the purpose of all this? Where am I going? But now, something has changed. You no longer seek answers to collect knowledge. You seek silence to inhabit presence. And in that silence, you begin to realize you're not here to become someone, but to remember yourself. To remember in the deepest sense of the word. Remember to bring back to the heart. To feel again who you are, without intermediaries, without concepts, without expectations. And then everything becomes clearer, simpler, more honest. You begin to feel when something resonates with you and when it doesn't, without needing to explain it, without justification. You feel when a path is meant for you and when it pulls you away from yourself. You know it in your bones, in your skin, in your heartbeat. And that kind of wisdom doesn't come from outside. It's not in books, nor in speeches, nor in doctrines. It's in your body, in your intuition, in that part of you that doesn't speak, but knows. We live so disconnected from that wisdom because we've learned to doubt ourselves, to trust more in what others say than in what we feel. From a young age, we were taught to obey before listening, to follow rules before following our inner compass. And so, bit by bit, we abandoned being. We forgot our voice, our impulse, our direct connection with life. But when you realize that, not to blame, but to heal, the real return begins. A return that is not linear, not perfect, not fast. It's a process, a back and forth, remembering and forgetting, a falling and rising again. But each time you return to yourself, the ground is firmer, the view is clearer, the heart is more open, and you understand, being is not a destination. It is a state you can return to at any moment, no matter what is happening outside. An inner space that isn't shaken by the noise of the world. A sacred room where there is always calm, even when there is a storm outside. And what happens when you start living from there? Your relationships shift. You no longer seek someone to complete you. You connect because you want to share. Because something in you overflows and longs to expand. Your work transforms. It's no longer a burden. It becomes a channel, a space where you can express, create, serve. And if it doesn't, at least now you know. You can feel the misalignment, and that awareness becomes a compass, guiding you towards something truer. Your decisions become more intuitive, less mental. You no longer need to plan everything, control everything, understand everything. You learn to trust, to flow, to let go. And that trust isn't naive. It's wisdom, because you've seen that the more you force, the more things resist. And the more you open, the more you receive. And then something beautiful begins to blossom, gratitude. Not a scripted gratitude. A gratitude that rises from the soul. A deep feeling of awe for simply being alive. For breathing. For feeling. You discover that nothing is as urgent as it once seemed. That life is not about accumulating, but about experiencing. That you don't need all the answers, because every day offers you a new question. So slowly, you begin to walk more slowly, to look more deeply, to listen without judgment, to speak from the center. And what once was a terrifying mystery becomes companionship. The mystery of being is no longer a problem to be solved. It becomes a dance you can enjoy. And you dance with life, with your light, with your shadows, with your doubts, with your love. Because being is not just awareness. It's also movement. It's emotion. It's body. To be present doesn't mean to always be calm. It means to be, to feel, to live without running away. To inhabit your experience as if it were sacred, because it is. Every gesture, every word, every glance can be a doorway. an opportunity to return to yourself, to remember, to reconnect. And then you discover that the world is not your enemy. It's your mirror. Everything you see outside shows you something inside. It reflects, it teaches, it awakens. And once you understand this, you no longer need to run. You no longer need to change others. You no longer need to win any battles. You just need to be, to breathe, to feel, to live. And now, maybe you're asking yourself, so what now? What do I do with everything I've felt, everything I've remembered, everything that has awakened within me? There's no single answer, but there is a direction. Live from it. Living from being doesn't mean changing your entire life overnight. It doesn't mean isolating yourself or becoming someone new or abandoning all your responsibilities. It means that little by little, everything you do starts to grow from your truth. That every decision comes from within, not from fear, not from habit, not from guilt. It means bringing awareness into the ordinary, really listening when you talk to someone, feeling your emotions instead of denying them, choosing from the body, from intuition, from authenticity. It means being willing to lose what you're not, so you no longer keep losing who you are. The world may stay the same. The noise will go on, the headlines will continue, the challenges will persist. But you will no longer be the same, because you've touched something deep. You've remembered that there's a space inside you that no one can touch, a flame that cannot be blown out by the wind, a root that doesn't tear in the storm. That is your home, and you can return to it anytime you need. Returning to being is returning to the essence, to simplicity, to what is real, to what doesn't need explanation. And the more you live from it, the more natural it becomes, the more obvious, the more inevitable. You don't become someone different. You become what you always were, without the noise. Laughter becomes lighter, tears become cleaner, words become truer, relationships become deeper. You begin to say no without guilt. You begin to say yes with power. You begin to walk away from what no longer resonates. You open to what calls you, even if you don't yet understand it. Not because you have control, but because you have trust. You trust life. You trust your path. You trust that invisible thread that quietly guides you from within. Because now you've heard it, you felt it, and you can no longer pretend it's not there. The mystery of being still remains. You can't trap it, define it, or fully explain it. But you can live it. You can breathe it. You can honor it. And that is more than enough. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be present. You don't need to have it all figured out. You need to be available. You don't need to be ahead of everyone else. You need to walk in truth. And in walking that way, little by little, fear dissolves. Judgment loses its grip. The weight of comparison fades. And in its place, trust begins to grow. Presence begins to deepen. Love begins to expand. Not a love that depends. Not a love that measures or waits. A love that simply is, just like you. Because that love doesn't come from others. It is born from within. It comes from being. And the more you rest in it, the more you begin to see it everywhere. In the trees, in the sky, in the faces of strangers, in the silence of an ordinary morning. And then you know, not in your head, but with your whole being, you are not alone. You never were. You never will be. Because the being that lives in you is the same one that lives in all. Only the costume changes. The story, the form, but the essence is one. You are life seeing life. You are consciousness meeting itself. You are the mystery being. And that, simply that, changes everything. Welcome home.